The observation deck of the Zephyrian command vessel Eternal Wisdom hummed with nervous energy. Ambassador Kethvar's 4 eyes tracked the holographic displays floating before him, each one showing the same impossible sight. A fleet of primitive ships emerging from hyperspace. Human ships. Ambassador, his aide Velnix whispered, her crystalline voice trembling. The Council wasn't expecting them for another solar cycle. The war with the Devourers has escalated beyond all projections. Kethvar's tentacles curled in what his species called the gesture of deep concern. For 300 years, the Galactic Consortium had protected younger civilizations from the horrors of the void. The humans were supposed to remain safely quarantined on their little blue world until they developed proper shielding technology. Now they were here, in ships that barely qualified as spaceworthy, facing an enemy that had consumed 17 star systems in the past month alone. Scan their vessels, Kethvar commanded. I need to know what we're dealing with. The tactical officer, a hulking Gorvanian named Thex, manipulated his console with surprising delicacy. His rocky features showed confusion as data streamed across his screen. Sir, these readings, they don't make sense. The human ships are running on primitive fusion drives. Their hull plating is basic titanium steel composite. Their weapons are... Thex paused, double-checking his instruments. Kinetic projectiles and nuclear warheads. A collective silence fell over the bridge. Velnix was the first to speak. They brought nuclear weapons to fight the Devourers. Kethvar felt a chill run through his nervous system. The Devourers were energy beings, creatures of pure malevolence that fed on the life force of entire civilizations. Their ships were biological constructs, able to regenerate from almost any damage. Nuclear weapons were about as effective against them as harsh language. The humans didn't know this, of course, they couldn't know. Open a communication channel, Kethvar ordered. Priority Alpha. I need to speak with their commanding officer immediately. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a face that would haunt Kethvar's dreams for cycles to come. The human was young by his species' standards, perhaps 30 solar rotations. His skin was dark, his eyes a startling brown, and there was something in his expression that Kethvar couldn't quite identify. Determination, yes. But something else. Something that made the ambassador's 4 stomachs clench with unease. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet, the human said, her voice crisp and professional. I'm assuming you're in charge of this particular corner of the battlefield, Ambassador. Kethvar of Zephyr Prime, he replied, struggling to maintain diplomatic protocol. Admiral Chen, with all due respect, your species isn't prepared for this conflict. The Devourers are... I know what they are. Chen interrupted. We've been monitoring your communications for the past 6 months. We know about the 17 systems. We know about the feeding process. We know about the casualties. The bridge fell silent again. Humans had been monitoring consortium communications. That should have been impossible. Their technology wasn't advanced enough to break galactic encryption codes. Unless, Admiral, Kethvar said carefully, your ships appear to be running on outdated technology. How exactly do you plan to engage an enemy that has defeated our most advanced battle fleets? Admiral Chen smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Ambassador, you've made a fundamental error in your assessment of humanity. You've confused technological advancement with combat effectiveness. You see primitive ships and assume primitive tactics. She gestured to something off-screen, and the display split to show the human fleet formation. There were perhaps 50 vessels, all smaller than the consortium's destroyers. They moved in perfect coordination like a school of predatory fish. The Devourers feed on energy, correct? They absorb power from weapons, shields, engines. They grow stronger with each ship they consume. Yes, Kethvar admitted. Which is why your nuclear arsenal is irrelevant? Chen's smile grew sharper. Ambassador, you're thinking like a civilized being. You're thinking about clean warfare, minimal casualties, surgical strikes. You're thinking like someone who has something to lose. The tactical display updated, showing the approaching Devourer fleet 3 dozen organic ships, each one larger than a consortium battlecruiser, their surfaces writhing with dark energy. We are not civilized beings, Ambassador. We are survivors of a planet where everything tried to kill us for 4 billion years, and we have nothing left to lose. Chen's image flickered for a moment, and when it stabilized, her expression had changed. The diplomatic mask was gone, replaced by something primal and terrifying. The Devourers consumed the colony ships we sent to Kepler 442b 3 weeks ago. 7 million civilians, including my daughter. They made the mistake of leaving survivors long enough to send a message. Kethavar felt his blood freeze in his veins. Admiral, so when you see our primitive ships and primitive weapons, don't think about technological inferiority. Think about what kind of species builds 10,000 nuclear warheads and then decides to put them on spaceships. The communication cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Vel quote Nix was the first to speak. Ambassador, what did she mean? What kind of species does that? Kethavar stared at the tactical display, watching the human ships accelerate toward the Devourer fleet at speeds that should have crushed their crews under G-forces. The numbers didn't add up. The technology didn't make sense. But the intent was crystal clear. The kind, he said quietly, that doesn't plan to survive the engagement. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the cramped command center of the UES Indomitable, her hands gripping the tactical rail as status reports flooded in from across the human fleet. The ship shuddered as it pushed beyond safe acceleration limits, but she barely noticed. Her attention was focused entirely on the enemy formation ahead. Ma'am, we're receiving additional communications from the consortium fleet, reported Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, her communications officer. They're demanding we fall back and wait for reinforcements. Ignored, Chen replied, without looking away from the display. What's our ETA to engagement range? 14 minutes, ma'am. All ships report ready for Operation Wildfire. Chen allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Operation Wildfire had been designed in the dark hours after the Kepler massacre, when Earth's brightest military minds realized they were facing an enemy that broke every rule of conventional warfare. The Devourers were perfect predators, evolved to consume the energy signatures of advanced civilizations. They grew stronger by absorbing power from shields, weapons, and engines. Traditional space combat was not just ineffective against them, it was counterproductive. But humans had never been traditional. Signal the fleet, Chen ordered. Begin final preparations. I want all reactors running at minimum power until we reach the trigger point. Around her, the bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. These were veterans, survivors of humanity's first encounters with the unknown. They understood what they were about to attempt. And they understood what it would cost. Admiral, called out Dr. Elena Vasquez from the science station. I'm detecting energy spikes from the Devourer fleet. They're beginning their feeding preparation. Chen nodded grimly. Intelligence reports suggested the Devourers entered a heightened state before major engagements, increasing their ability to absorb and process energy. It made them more dangerous, but also more focused on their feeding patterns. Perfect for what humanity had planned. Time to trigger point. 11 minutes, ma'am. Chen activated her personal communicator, switching to the command frequency that connected her to every ship captain in the fleet. 53 vessels, each one carrying a crew that knew they were flying into what conventional wisdom called a suicide mission. This is Admiral Chen. Final briefing begins now. The channel crackled to life as captains across the fleet acknowledged her transmission. These were the best Earth had to offer, not in terms of technology or resources, but in terms of sheer bloody-minded determination. At T-8 minutes, all ships will implement full communications blackout. No transmissions, no active sensors, no energy signatures above minimal life support. We go dark and stay dark until engagement. Captain Morrison of the Valiant was the first to respond. Admiral, without active sensors, we'll be flying blind. How do we maintain formation? Visual navigation and dead reckoning, Chen replied. The same way our ancestors crossed oceans before satellites, the same way they hunted mammoths before radar. We've drilled this 100 times, people. Trust your training. The channel fell silent for a moment, as the implications sank in. Fighting. A space battle without sensors was like performing surgery blindfolded. But it was also the only way to avoid triggering the Devourer's feeding response until it was too late for them to adapt. At T-4 minutes, all ships will begin final approach. Maximum acceleration, minimum power signatures. We punch through their formation like a spear through tissue paper. And then? Asked Captain Torres from the defiant Chen S smile was visible in her voice. Then we show them what humans do when their backs are against the wall. She switched to a private channel, addressing only her senior staff. The next part of the briefing wasn't for general consumption. Dr. Vasquez, confirm the payload calculations. One more time. The scientist's voice was steady, professional, but Chen could hear the underlying tension. All warheads are configured for maximum yield. The cascade pattern should provide optimal coverage across the enemy formation. And the likelihood of survival for ships within the blast radius? A pause. Negligible, Admiral. Chen closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her daughter's face in the last transmission from Kepler, 442b. The recording had lasted less than 30 seconds before the signal cut to static, but it had been enough to change everything humanity thought they knew about warfare among the stars. Her little girl, asking why the stars were going out. Understood, Doctor. Lieutenant Commander Webb, patch me through to the consortium fleet. I want to make sure they understand what's about to happen. The connection established quickly, and Ambassador Kethvar's alien features appeared on her personal display. His four eyes were wide with what she was learning to recognize as Zephyrian panic. Admiral Chen, please reconsider. Our reinforcements will arrive within the hour. There's no need for Ambassador. In 30 seconds, I'm going to order a communications blackout. After that point, you will not be able to contact my fleet. I need you to understand something very clearly. She leaned forward, making sure her face filled his screen. When this engagement begins, do not attempt to assist us. Do not enter the battle zone. Do not try to rescue survivors, just watch and learn. Admiral, the Devourers think they understand warfare because they've consumed advanced civilizations. They think they know how prey behaves, but they've never encountered a species that evolved from persistence hunters. They've never faced an enemy that views mutual destruction as an acceptable outcome. The countdown timer on her display showed 20 seconds. They're about to learn the difference. She cut the transmission and turned to face her bridge crew. 57 men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing full well what it entailed. They looked back at her with expressions of calm determination. All stations, prepare for communications blackout. From this point forward, we are ghosts in the void, silent, invisible, and absolutely deadly. The lights dimmed as all non-essential systems powered down. The bridge fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by the gentle hum of life support and the steady beeping of the countdown timer. 10 seconds. Chen thought of Earth, blue and beautiful in the darkness of space. She thought of the colonies that would never be built, the children who would never be born if humanity failed here. 5 seconds. She thought of every species the Devourers had consumed, entire civilizations reduced to energy and memory. 3 seconds. She thought of her daughter. 2 seconds. Weapons free, she whispered. The timer reached 0, and the human fleet vanished from all sensor displays, 53 vessels suddenly invisible to both friend and foe alike. They had become what their prey ancestors once were in the African savanna. Patient, silent, and utterly relentless. The hunt had begun. The bridge of the Indomitable had been transformed into something from humanity's distant past. Navigation charts spread across physical displays, officers hunched over manual calculations, and the only light came from emergency strips running along the deck. They had become cavemen with nuclear weapons, navigating by starlight and instinct. Admiral Chen moved silently between stations, checking their progress against the mission timeline. 6 minutes since blackout. 2 minutes until intercept. Without active sensors, tracking the enemy required a combination of visual observation and educated guesswork. Lieutenant Jackson, their best astronavigation specialist, was bent over a periscope-style viewer that extended from the hull, manually tracking the Devourer fleet's position. "Enemy formation holding steady," he whispered. "Distance approximately 4,000 kilometers and closing." Chen nodded, fighting the urge to speak louder than necessary. Sound discipline was crucial now, even though space couldn't transmit noise between ships. Decades of military training had taught them that silence was a state of mind as much as a tactical requirement. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her calculations, her face pale in the emergency lighting. "Admiral, I'm tracking energy signatures from the Devourer ships. They're confused." That was the plan. For the past hour, the Devourers had been detecting the energy signatures of 53 human ships approaching their position. Now, suddenly, those signatures had vanished without explanation. The aliens were perfect predators, but they had evolved to hunt prey that followed predictable patterns. Civilizations that fought with energy weapons, protected themselves with energy shields, and communicated through energy transmissions. Humanity was offering them none of those things. "Visual confirmation of enemy formation," Jackson whispered. "I count 34 vessels arranged in their standard feeding pattern." Chen moved to the observation port and peered through the manual sight. The Devourer ships were unlike anything in the consortium fleet, organic constructs that seemed to pulse with dark life. They moved like living creatures, their surfaces rippling with absorbed energy from previous battles. Beautiful comma in their way, and absolutely terrifying. "T-30 seconds to engagement range," reported Commander Webb. "All ships maintaining formation silence." Around them, the human fleet continued its approach like a pack of prehistoric hunters surrounding a mammoth. No communication, no coordination beyond what they had drilled endlessly in simulation. Each captain knew their role, their position, their moment to strike. T-15 seconds. Chen closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In 15 seconds, everything would change. The carefully maintained silence would explode into chaos, and the first shots of humanity's real war against the cosmos would be fired. T-10 seconds. Weapon systems powering up. The bridge hummed back to life as combat systems came online. Targeting computers activated, nuclear warheads armed themselves, and 53 human ships suddenly reappeared on every sensor display in local space. But by then, it was already too late. "All ships," Chen said quietly, "execute Operation Wildfire." The first salvo launched simultaneously from every human vessel. Not energy weapons that the Devourers could absorb, not plasma bolts they could redirect, but simple kinetic impactors moving at significant fractions of light speed. Chunks of tungsten and steel, accelerated by magnetic rails to velocities that turned them into relativistic bullets. Primitive technology by galactic standards, but devastating in its simplicity. The Devourer ships reacted with supernatural speed, their organic hulls shifting and adapting to absorb the incoming kinetic energy. But as their feeding systems activated, preparing to consume the power from the human attack, they triggered the second phase of humanity's plan. Nuclear deployment. All ships. Maximum yield. Minimum proximity. What followed would be remembered across the galaxy for generations to come. Not because of its sophistication, but because of its brutal, elegant simplicity. The Devourers had evolved to consume energy weapons. Their biology was perfectly adapted to absorb, process, and redirect almost any form of electromagnetic or plasma-based attack. They could drain the power from fusion reactors, siphon energy from particle beams, even feed on the electromagnetic signatures of advanced computers. But they had never encountered nuclear fission. The first warheads detonated at point-blank range, releasing the fundamental binding forces of atomic matter directly into the Devourer formation. Not energy weapons that could be absorbed, but the conversion of matter itself into pure, unfiltered radiation. The aliens' feeding systems, trying desperately to process this new form of energy, began consuming the radiation faster than their organic structures could handle. The very adaptation that made them perfect predators became their weakness when faced with prey that refused to follow the established patterns. Multiple direct hits, reported Jackson, his voice tight with excitement. Enemy ships are showing significant damage. Their energy matrices are destabilizing. Chen watched through the observation port as the first Devourer vessel began to collapse in on itself. Its organic hull rippled and convulsed as it tried to process the nuclear radiation, but the raw atomic forces were too much for its feeding systems to handle. Second salvo, all ships, full nuclear barrage. The space around the battle lit up like a newborn star as hundreds of nuclear warheads detonated simultaneously. The Devourer fleet, caught in the middle of their feeding pattern, found themselves consuming more energy than they could possibly process. One by one, their ships began to implode. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez called out, her voice filled with amazement. "The cascade effect is working. Their feeding systems are overloading and triggering sympathetic collapses in nearby vessels." Chen allowed herself a moment of savage satisfaction. The plan was working better than they had dared hope. The Devourer's greatest strength had become their fatal weakness when confronted with an enemy willing to turn matter itself into a weapon. But even as she watched the alien fleet tear itself apart, she knew the victory would come at a cost that would haunt humanity for generations. "All ships, prepare for Phase 3, it's time to finish this." The hardest part was yet to come. The aftermath of the nuclear barrage painted space in colors that no human eye had ever seen. Radiation from hundreds of detonated warheads created aurora-like phenomena as it interacted with cosmic dust and debris from the dying Devourer ships. It was beautiful and terrible, like watching the birth of a new constellation. Admiral Chen stood at the observation port of the Indomitable, counting the remaining enemy vessels. 22 survivors from an original force of 34. Their organic hulls showed severe damage, but they were adapting, learning. The Devourers were nothing if not resilient. "Ma'am?" Lieutenant Commander Webb called out, his voice tight with concern. "We're receiving priority communications from multiple sources. The Consortium Fleet, Earth Command, even some signals I can't identify." "Later," Chen replied without turning away from the display. "What's our fleet status?" Dr. Vasquez consulted her instruments. 41 vessels still operational. We've lost 12 ships to proximity detonations from our own nuclear weapons. The remaining crews are reporting significant radiation exposure. Chen nodded grimly. They had known this would happen. Nuclear weapons in space were indiscriminate killers, as dangerous to those who deployed them as to their intended targets. But they had also proven to be the only effective counter to the Devourer's feeding systems. Estimated casualty count? 3,215 confirmed dead. Unknown number of radiation casualties among the survivors. 3,000 of humanity's finest, dead in the first 10 minutes of the engagement. On any other day, it would have been considered a catastrophic defeat. But the Devourers had consumed entire star systems, millions of lives reduced to energy and memory. By those standards, this was a victory. "Admiral," called out Captain Morrison over the fleet communication channel, "enemy survivors are regrouping. They're adapting their feeding patterns to account for nuclear radiation." Chen cursed silently. Of course they were adapting. The Devourers were perfect predators, evolved over millions of years to consume any form of energy they encountered. Humanity had surprised them once, but now they knew what to expect. "All ships, implement Phase 3. Maximum acceleration, ramming speed." Collective pause fell over the communication channels. Phase 3 was the part of Operation Wildfire that no one talked about during the briefings. The part that made strong men weep and turn away from the planning sessions. "Ma'am," Webb said quietly, "are you certain?" Chen turned to face her bridge crew, these men and women who had followed her across impossible distances to fight an enemy that shouldn't exist. They looked back at her with expressions of trust, fear, and resigned determination. "The Devourers learn from every encounter," she said, her voice carrying across the bridge. "Every energy signature, every weapon system, every tactical pattern. If we let them escape, they'll be ready for nuclear weapons the next time they encounter human forces." She paused, thinking of Earth's children, growing up under blue skies that might soon go dark if this mission failed. "We cannot let them escape." Commander Webb nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like electricity. Ramming speed, all ships. Final approach begins now. What followed would be debated by military historians for centuries. Not the tactical brilliance of it, but the sheer uncompromising brutality. 41 human ships, their hulls cracked and irradiated from the nuclear barrage, turned toward the surviving Devourer vessels and accelerated to maximum velocity. The alien ships tried to escape, their organic engines pushing them to speeds that should have been impossible for biological constructs, but they were damaged, their feeding system still struggling to process the nuclear radiation they had absorbed. And humans had always been persistence hunters. First impact in 30 seconds, Jackson reported. UES Defiant is on intercept course with enemy vessel designation Alpha 7. Through the observation port, Chen could see Captain Torres's ship racing toward one of the smaller Devourer vessels. The Defiant was running dark except for her engines, a spear of human determination cutting through the void. 20 seconds. The Devourer ship tried to maneuver, its organic hull rippling as it attempted to avoid the collision. But Torres had been calculating intercept courses since before the war began, and his ship adjusted its trajectory with mechanical precision. 10 seconds. 5. Impact. The Defiant struck the alien vessel amidships at nearly 10% of light speed. Both ships vanished in a brief, brilliant flash as their combined mass converted to energy. When the radiation cleared, nothing remained but expanding gas and debris. UES Defiant confirmed destroyed, Webb reported, his voice hollow. Enemy vessel. Alpha 7 eliminated, 1 down, 21 to go. UES Valiant approaching target Alpha 3. Captain Morrison reports engines at 110%. Chen watched as another of her captains guided his ship toward a Devourer vessel, twice its size. The alien ship was trying to feed on the Valiant's engine signature, its hull glowing with absorbed energy. It never occurred to the Devourer that prey might use its own consumption patterns against it. The collision tore both ships apart, but not before the alien vessel's feeding systems overloaded from the sudden influx of reactor energy. The explosion took out 2 nearby Devourer ships, their own feeding systems creating a cascade failure that rippled through the enemy formation. 3 more enemy vessels down, Dr. Vasquez reported. The cascade effect is still working in our favor. Ship after ship followed the same pattern, human vessels racing toward their targets at suicidal velocities, turning themselves into kinetic weapons guided by crews who knew they would never see home again. The UES Courageous took out 2 Devourers when her nuclear payload detonated during the ramming attack. The UES Relentless managed to punch completely through her target, emerging from the other side before both ships exploded. The UES Indefatigable somehow survived her collision, only to be consumed by the dying Devourer vessel. As its feeding systems went critical. One by one, the human fleet sacrificed itself on the altar of victory. Admiral, Webb said quietly, we're receiving a transmission from the consortium fleet. Ambassador Kethvar is requesting permission to assist. Chen shook her head. Negative. They need to stay clear until this is over. Ma'am, we're down to 8 ships. The remaining Devourer vessels are adapting to our ramming attacks. They're learning to avoid the collisions. Through the observation port, Chen could see the surviving alien ships had changed their formation, spreading out to make ramming attacks more difficult. They were damaged, but still dangerous, their organic hulls beginning to repair themselves using energy absorbed from the previous battles. How many Devourers are left? 11 vessels, all showing significant damage but still combat capable. Chen closed her eyes, running the calculations in her head. 8 human ships against 11 Devourers. The aliens were learning, adapting, becoming more dangerous with each passing minute. And Earth expected her to win. Signal all remaining ships, she said quietly. Final phase authorization. Omega Protocol. Webb's face went pale. Admiral, the Omega Protocol. That's what we came here to do, Commander. Send the signal. Around the bridge, her crew worked in stunned silence as they prepared to implement humanity's final contingency. The plan that made nuclear ramming attacks seem like gentle, Diplomacy. In the depths of space, the last 8 human ships began broadcasting a very specific signal. Not a communication, not a weapon, but something far more dangerous. A dinner bell. Epilogue. What legends are made. Of 3 hours later, Ambassador Kethvar stood in the observation lounge of the Eternal Wisdom, staring out at the debris field that had once been a battle zone. The space around them was eerily quiet, lit only by the fading radiation signatures of destroyed ships and the distant glow of stars. The Devourer fleet was gone. All 34 vessels destroyed, their organic hulls scattered across several thousand cubic kilometers of space. But the human fleet was gone too. Every single ship sacrificed in the engagement. Except for one. The UES Indomitable hung motionless in the void, her hull cracked and blackened from radiation exposure, her engines dark and silent. She looked like a ghost ship, a relic from humanity's brief, violent passage through the stars. Are you certain there are survivors? Kethvar asked his aide. Vel quote. Nix checked her instruments again. Faint life signs, Ambassador. Perhaps a dozen individuals still, alive in the forward sections. Kethvar felt his tentacles curl in what his people recognized as deep respect. A dozen humans had survived the implementation of Omega Protocol. Given what that protocol entailed, it was nothing short of miraculous. Prepare a rescue shuttle, he ordered. Full medical support, and Velnix, treat them with the honor they deserve. The rescue operation took 2 hours. When the survivors were finally brought aboard the Eternal Wisdom, Kethvar was waiting in the medical bay. He watched as human medics worked to treat radiation sickness, burns, and injuries that should have been fatal. Admiral Chen was conscious, but barely. Her dark skin was pale and her eyes were sunken, but when she saw Kethvar, she managed a weak smile. Ambassador, she whispered. Did it work? Every Devourer vessel was destroyed. Kethvar confirmed. The threat to this sector has been eliminated. Chen closed her eyes in relief. Good. The Omega Protocol. It was our last option. Admiral, Kethvar said carefully. What exactly was the Omega Protocol? Our sensors detected massive energy signatures before the final Devourer ships were destroyed, but we couldn't identify the source. Chen's smile grew slightly stronger. You said the Devourers were perfect predators, right? Evolved to consume energy from any source they encountered? Yes, and we gave them exactly what they wanted, she said quietly. Every reactor signature, every energy pattern, every electromagnetic emission we could generate. But all of it was false. Projected holograms, sensor ghosts, phantom signals. Kethvar felt his 4 stomachs clench as understanding dawned. You made them think there was food when there was nothing there. Worse, Chen whispered. We made them think there was an entire fleet to consume. The last 8 ships projected the energy signatures of 800 vessels, all broadcasting from the same location. The implications were staggering. The Devourers, driven by their feeding instincts, had converged on what they thought was the largest energy concentration they had ever encountered. Their feeding systems, already damaged by the nuclear attacks, had overloaded trying to process the Phantom Fleet. They had quite literally fed themselves to death. But how did your ship survive the feeding process? Velnix asked. Chen, smile, turned grim. They didn't. 7 of our 8 ships were consumed completely. The Indomitable only survived because she was running the projection equipment. When the Devourers realized they had been tricked, she didn't need to finish. The damage to her ship told the story clearly enough. The Devourer's final death throes had nearly destroyed the last human vessel. Admiral, Kethvar said quietly, your species has achieved something that the Galactic Consortium thought impossible. You've eliminated an existential threat that has plagued the galaxy for millennia. At what cost? Chen asked, her voice barely audible. 53 ships, 15,000 crew members, some of the finest people humanity ever produced. Kethvar considered his words carefully. In his culture, there were specific rituals for honoring warriors who died in defense of others. But no human would understand the complex tentacle movements and harmonic frequencies involved. Instead, he did something unprecedented in consortium diplomatic history. He knelt beside Chen's medical bed. Admiral, I want you to understand something. In the 300 years since the consortium was founded, we have lost over 2 million vessels to the Devourers. Entire species have been consumed, star systems evacuated, civilizations relocated to avoid their feeding patterns. He paused, making sure she was listening. In 3 hours, your species accomplished what we could not achieve in 3 centuries. The galaxy is safer because of what you and your people did here today. Chen nodded weakly. Will you make sure Earth knows? That it wasn't for nothing? Admiral, Kethvar said solemnly, every species in the galaxy will know. What happened here will be remembered for generations to come. Over the following months, as Chen and her surviving crew members recovered, reports of the battle spread throughout consortium space. The story grew in the telling, as stories often do, but the core facts remained unchanged. Humanity had entered galactic civilization. With primitive technology and obsolete weapons, they had faced an enemy that had consumed advanced civilizations for millions of years, and they had won through sheer, bloody-minded determination to protect what they loved. The Zephyrians called it the Battle of Impossible Victory. The Gorvanians named it the day the prey became hunters. The Velnari simply called it the human solution, a phrase that entered galactic standard language as a term for achieving victory through methods that seemed like madness to civilized minds. But among humans it was known by a different name. The day doubt was erased across the stars. Because when the galaxy looked at humanity now, they no longer saw a primitive species that needed protection. They saw something far more valuable and far more terrifying. They saw survivors. And in a universe filled with dangers beyond imagination, there was nothing more precious than learning how to survive. Admiral Chen returned to Earth 6 months later. Her body scarred by radiation but her spirit unbroken. She was greeted as a hero, but she always insisted that the real heroes were the 15,000 crew members who never came home. In the years that followed, as humanity expanded into the stars and took its place among the galactic community, children would ask their parents about the battle. They would want to know how their species had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. The answer was always the same. They fought like humans. And that, as the galaxy learned, made all the difference.